Okay, stop us if you've heard this before, but yet another new poll shows a majority of Americans support House Democrats' impeachment inquiry into President Trump. According to a new NPR PBS NewsHour Marist poll, 52% of Americans said they approve of House Democrats' impeachment inquiry into Trump. That's up 3 points since last month. 43% disapproved. 49% said they support the impeachment of the president. 47% are opposed. Americans in this poll are divided 48 to 48 on whether they support the Senate voting to remove Trump from office. Good Lord.
That's high. Still
these are high. Yeah.
68, Willie, we're going to keep going, Willie, but just let's look at those numbers. Keep those numbers up on the screen. And if you're driving in, listening to us, driving into work, 48% of Americans support Donald Trump being removed from office. 48% opposed. But Willie, we're within the margin of error again. This is about the third or fourth poll, I believe, where half of Americans, 50% of Americans, soon a majority of Americans, support Donald Trump being impeached in the House, convicted in the Senate, and removed from office.
Yeah.
This is staggering.
And these questions, Joe, are making the leap not to do you support an impeachment inquiry? We've seen support for that. This question here, the one on the screen, is do you support the Senate voting to remove President Trump from office? In other words, have you seen enough already to believe that Donald Trump should be removed from office? 48% say so. Yesterday, we had the Fox News poll that showed 51% of Americans supported that idea. That led to Donald Trump writing sort of a breakup tweet with Fox News yesterday before perhaps getting back together with Fox News at his rally last night. But he sees these polls, especially the Fox News polls, and there are enough of them now. There's a critical mass of these polls that you can't dismiss any one or the other as an outlier. 68% of Americans said it's not acceptable for a president to ask foreign countries to investigate his political rivals. 68%.
Hey, Corey, that's the answer.
There you go.
Corey, that's the answer.
Only 26% say it's acceptable. Almost 60% say they do not trust the administration very much or at all. 40% say they do trust the administration a great or a good amount, Joe.
I wonder who those 40% are. So anyway, Donnie Deutsch, it seems that Donald Trump he's having a problem with the Republicans over the Kurds. There seems to be a sort of a real rift there. He's sort of throwing Fox News under the bus. He doesn't like data that comes from Fox News, that actually it's polling. It's the same pollsters, by the way. You had liars going out yesterday going, oh, well, there's a liberal firm that's... No, it's the same group of people who were saying that only 40% supported impeachment a month or two ago. But Donnie, he's throwing Fox News under the bus. He's throwing Republicans under the bus. He's throwing the Kurds under the bus. And wait for it. He's throwing Rudy Giuliani under the bus. You'll have to ask Rudy. Hey, you got a buddy who's in jail right now who heard that, right? You're going to just have to ask Michael Cohen about that. Now we're hearing you're going to have to ask Rudy. We'll get to these stories, but my God, two of Rudy's associates who also were close to Donald Trump in jail. I mean, and now Rudy is having to face some pretty tough questions himself.
You know, if you know Donald Trump, there isn't anybody he wouldn't throw. He would throw his family under the bus, and I don't say that.
Well, of course,
glibly. He will be the last man standing until they carry him out. 2 points. First of all, I think it's important that the Democrats, this new Rudy story, obviously, there's so much to unpack there. But the good news, bad news, as the Democrats continue to move forward on impeachment is they still can't lose that one-sentence strategy. The more this thing airs out, if you will, and fans out, you start to, in a strange way, it gets worse, but it also dilutes the simple one-sentence message. The president sought a foreign power to get dirt on his opponent at the expense of our national security. We can't still lose that one headline, and that's critical for the Democrats. I want to also go back to one point you made earlier, Joe. I don't understand how somebody like a Mitt Romney does not come forward, it is such an obvious thing to say. Right now, you will be an American hero. And you can say, look, I've supported the president's policies, and this is painful, but I work for the voters and I work for the Constitution. It astounds me as a Brandon guy and a guy who's managed people's careers that none of these people get that. It's not even brave. It's smart politically.
Hasn't Mitt come forward?
Mitt has come forward. No, I mean in a more meaningful way to stand up.
So when you want him to, so you want Mitt Romney when he's saying that what the president's done is wrong and despicable, you want him carrying a blowtorch and just like spraying anybody. Is that what you want, Donnie?
No, I do.
He's one of the guys that's come forward.
Okay, stand corrected on Mitt Romney. But my point is, even with just saying it's wrong, what is wrong with saying and he does not belong in office? What is wrong with somebody taking that
it's so
lead?
obvious.
Of course it's wrong. I mean, I don't think you get points for that at this point. But to me, he's the one guy that is bulletproof. And what would Americans think? What would Americans think if he stood up and said, look, this is not working? This is not working. People would line up behind him. Republicans would line up behind him.
Oh, I don't know. Yes. The thing is, though, Donnie, that here's the thing. Not everybody just has a constituency of the 12 or 13 people that work in their Upper East Side mansion like you.
Joe, no.
Mitt
Romney
actually.
Poor Donnie.
No, I'm aware.
Mitt has voters. No, I'm just saying.
Okay.
You do have to bring people along. You don't. It's not just you don't start at 0 and go to 100 miles an hour. I know people want Mitt Romney to carry that blowtorch.
Heroes do.
Mitt has started. No, actually, Abraham Lincoln at the beginning of the Civil War. Not to get too deep here, but at the beginning of the Civil War, said, slavery. If I can save the Union and we can keep slavery, then let's keep slavery. He didn't really believe that, but he knew he had to bring the North along. And he said it was all about saving the Union. We have to save the Union. Then eventually he moved. When he thought that people were ready, then he kept moving till he knew he could get to emancipation. So Mitt Romney is, I think, Gene Robinson, correct me if I'm wrong, Mitt Romney has stepped out there about as strongly as I think he can politically right now. He's called it disgusting. I don't know the exact words, but it is a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-step process, especially when you have people who support somebody. You want the facts to do the talking, and you follow the facts.
Yeah, I mean, just the objective truth is that Romney has gone further out than any other Republican senator at this point. He just has. He has come out and he uses the entry words, right? Deeply disturbing and appalling and that sort of those. That's the beginning of what I hope is the progression you talk about, Joe. But people like Cory Gardner and Susan Collins and Joni Ernst are going to continue to come under pressure from their constituents and from reporters who are going to keep asking the question over and over again for 4 minutes if necessary, continue pressing. And they're going to have to come up with better answers than Gardner did. Look, the political reality is they're still all petrified of Donald Trump tweet storm. And Romney is more immune to that than most of them because the people of Utah are really not Trumpist Republicans. They're conservative Republicans, but he's probably the one who has the least to worry about from his Republican constituents, I think.
All right.
Yeah, Willie,
go ahead, Jim.
Just really quickly to Willie. There was an event last night, Willie, where the president got out and said a few things, was a little unbalanced. As George Conway said, the husband of one of the president's top aides, it said he appeared to have severe personality disorders that were on full display. Out of respect to the family and his loved ones, we're not going to be showing that speech. We actually think he would, and I'm hoping that he can get some care and get some treatment because once again, it seems that the president of the United States is detached from reality and not well.
Well, consider what he's up against now. Rudy Giuliani, 2 of his buddies, businessmen, were arrested. They were walking onto a plane bound for Europe. They were intercepted on the jetway and brought back and arrested.
That's happened to us before, by the way.
It has,
Willie,
and I was
right?
hoping
It's
you wouldn't
not
bring
fun.
that up. Yeah,
it's not fun. 3 years later, we finally get out of Turkey, but we'll talk about that next block. But go ahead.
Long story. So that's the backdrop of this is he got questions on his way out of the White House about that. Who are these two guys? He said, I didn't really know them. There might be a picture with me and them, but I didn't really know them. But the indictment says they are the go-betweens. They are the answer to the question of who may have been paying Rudy Giuliani to fly all over the country. There were connections in Ukraine that could get Rudy in touch with the people to find the dirt on the Bidens.
Yeah, can we go back to the llast picture? That guy on the right, he dresses like Donnie. But go ahead.
Hey, Joe,
Oh, my
Joe,
God.
you and I, pal, let's go to the schoolyard, all right? Because you're going hard today.
Oh, come on.
Come
on, Donnie. By the way, I love the leaves behind you since you're in the autumn of your life. I think it all.
Joe, I don't think it's nice that you're mocking cancer, Joe. I talked about a melanoma and you mocked it.
I'm sorry.
I think that's making me sad. I just want to say that. Can I go back seriously to the Romney thing? I think we're setting a very low. No, just give me 30 seconds. I think we're setting a very low bar.
First of all, I didn't mock cancer.
I'm
I
kidding.
thought you were talking about
Don't tweet. He
your
did not.
girlfriend.
He was making fun of
I thought
me.
you were talking about your girlfriend Melanomia, who was somebody that you brought back.
Just for the tweet, people, Joe did not mock cancer. But I do want to go back seriously.
Can I go? I have something to say.
Very quickly.
Do you really have to
Very,
go
very,
back?
very quickly.
Do you have to?
Yes, I do. Very quickly. We're setting a low bar where we go, somebody said it's wrong. Leaders go further than that. I don't agree with you. I think if Mitt Romney stood up and said, look, we need to start to really think where we're going as a country and about this man's leadership. I do not think, to your point earlier, I think people would line up behind him. That's what leaders do. Okay, I said my piece.
Okay.
And I'm not going to wear this shirt anymore.
I wanted to go forward a little bit because I did see a good bit of that rally last night, and I don't think we should show it. But, you know, for the reasons you said, Willie, you get the feeling the guy is kind of unhinged and desperate. He is just saying stuff and flailing out in ways that are even more crazy than what he normally does. And the stuff he said about the Bidens, the words he used,
yeah,
it's all pretty disgusting.
It was really disturbing stuff. Okay, we're going to actually get to the Giuliani story after a break. Yeah, Tom Winter, NBC News' Tom Winter is going to join us, as well as Dave Ehrenberg.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.